So now that I have the mill all back together, I've got the belt on, I've got the hopper assembly on, everything is back in place. Let's talk a little bit about how you actually operate a mill. And I'm going to keep this kind of basic so that it doesn't matter what size mill you're operating, whether it's a little one like this or if you're operating something that is much larger, maybe 12, 20 inch or larger stones. Because what I told you earlier is that despite this mill being from the 90s and this Williams mill over here being far older than that, the component pieces and how they go together and how they work hasn't really changed all that much. It's kind of interesting how the technology is what it is. So the way that the component pieces work together is you've got the hopper up here and your grain goes in it. This component here has a set screw here, and you can adjust this up and down. And what it does is it adjusts the flow of grain from the hopper into the mill. And I'm not sure, that might be a 1-inch gap that's in the bottom of this hopper. And so you can adjust this down from nothing so that no grain goes into the mill, all the way up to about 1 inch. And depending on the kind of grain you're got in your hopper, it's going to allow less or more grain go through the mill. If you're running something small like wheat berries, for example, and you've got this cranked all the way open, it's going to let a lot of wheat berries down into the mill. Whereas if you are running corn, those kernels are much larger, and so the gap here is only going to let so much corn roll through it. But still, if you've got corn in here and you've got this open all the way, you're going to let a lot of grain into your mill. So you've got the grain in the hopper, you've got this set where you want it to go. This little doodad is shaking back and forth this way. And I'll kind of demonstrate that for you. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is actuating this shoe and moving it back and forth, actually. There we go. That'll operate a little bit better. Okay. So once you get these parts set where you want it to go, the next thing to focus on is the stones themselves. One of your stones, as you saw, is fixed in place. The other stone, called the runner stone, is able to turn. Actually, it turns that way. And you can adjust the distance between the stones, and you saw that earlier. And you do that with this knob here. And so there's a lock nut here so that you can get it set where you want it to go and you lock it in place. And then you've got basically a screw here on the end. And you can run this all the way in, and as you can see, it's not going to move because it's all the way in. You never want to run the mill with the stones so close together that you can hear them grind together. That's bad. One reason it's bad is because you'll damage your stones that way. You'll effectively grind them together and make, well, polished stone. Polished stone does not grind very well, if at all. Also, you can really damage the grooves, the furrows that are all cut into that, and if that happens, you would be in a position where you'd have to probably recut your stone. A lot of work. You don't really want to do that. Granite itself, which is what's in this mill, if they struck together, as I mentioned, you'll get a spark. If you're running something like corn, not a problem. Corn is not flammable. Flour, however, is flammable, and it is possible that you might get a fire. Or worst case scenario is you could get an explosion if you have enough particulate matter in the atmosphere. You don't really want to run those risks. So it's always good to know where the stones come together and to mark the end of the shaft here so that you can see, okay, if I turn it to what is effectively 8 o'clock, I'm going to lock my stones up. And so you just have to kind of back that off a little bit and go, okay, that's 6 o'clock. It's still grinding together. Okay, that's 5 o'clock. And it's not grinding together. Actually, that's 4. And so having this visual representation on your nut here and knowing what's going on inside is a nice way to know where you are with this setup. And this is important to know when you go to actually grind whatever it is you want to grind in this thing. Now, if you put grain in here, set this wherever you want to go, set this wherever you want it to be, you will get something at the bottom. And the question is, did you get what you want in the bottom? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. So, after you open your box and you look inside and you see, oh, that's way too coarse, or oh, that's way too fine. Okay. You need to make some adjustments, but where do you make the adjustments? Okay. You have this adjustment here, which lets the grain go into the middle, and you also have this adjustment here, which adjusts how far the stones are apart. Both of these things work together, right? And if you crank this open so that it's open as wide as you can get it, and you've got your nut tightened down to where it's just barely, the stones are barely not touching, okay? You're putting a lot of grain into this mill, and you're squeezing it really tight and really quickly. And that's not really good. By doing that, by running that much grain really tightly like that, you're going to generate, one, a lot of heat, because this is effectively a big friction box. So you're generating a lot of heat, and you do run the risk of really wearing out your stones like that, because you're really grinding them, And you may find that when you open the box at the bottom, it isn't what you want. It's got a bad odor to it, right? Because it's too hot. Or it just didn't grind very well, especially after you've been using it for a while like that. And you've been really misusing it. You've worn out the stones, and it's not working very well for you. So, in a lot of ways, especially when you're kind of learning this to begin with, it's a little bit of a better approach to dribble the grain down into the mill. So set this to where you don't have a big gap here, and you just dribble the grain into it. And then you can kind of adjust this out a little bit wider. Now, when you do that, the product that you're going to get in the bottom is going to be coarser than maybe what you're after, right? Or it may be spot on if you're grinding corn and you want like a really coarse cornmeal. But if you're grinding something like wheat, you probably want something a little bit on the finer side of things. But if you work these two pieces together, and you kind of open this and close that, or open this and close that, and kind of work these things together and keep checking what you've got in the box, you'll eventually get this thing really dialed in to where it's producing the product that you want at the bottom. Whether that's a fine wheat flour, or if you're trying to do like grits, or really coarse cornmeal, for example. So do kind of like approach this from a very kind standpoint, actually. Where you kind of go at it a little bit slow. If you mill slow, you'll end up with a better product at the bottom. Okay. If you want it done right this second, then you're going to have this wide open. You're going to have this as closed as far as possible, and you'll be able to smell it. Actually, you will be able to smell this hot, burnt smell. Now, it won't be to the point of like burning something on the stove, for example. But you'll definitely be able to pick up the odor from what this thing is producing. So when that happens, which you can, if from time to time you're not paying attention to what you're doing and you kind of get a little bit out of adjustment. If that happens, the first thing you can do is to open this and get them stones a little further apart, especially if you're pouring the grain into it. Get those stones a little further apart, and it'll grind better. And then once you get these apart, you can then close this down and slow down the grain that's going into the mill. And you can really work this thing and get it to where it doesn't produce that odor. Because if you don't have that odor, you're moving in the right direction, actually. Also, after you've run a batch, because this amount will fit down here in this particular example, the Williams over here, I just have a bucket that I keep rolling. When you open the box, feel it. You can feel what does it feel like? What does it smell like? Really get up close to it and smell this grain. Done right, where you've got the input set at the right speed and you've got your stones set at the right distance, this thing doesn't produce a tremendous amount of heat, actually. It does produce some, because as I called this is a big friction box. You've got two stones which are rubbing stuff together. That's going to create friction, that's going to create heat. But if you control these two pieces, you can control how much heat you put into your stones here. The other thing that can kind of help you to manage how much heat is in here is the amount of time that you mill. As I said, this amount here fits down here. But if you grind this, pull this out and empty it, put more in here, grind it, empty it, put more, grind it, empty it, and you kind of have that process, and you are milling for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. This is cast iron, and it's going to start to pick up that heat, right? And of course we know cast iron loves heat, and it will radiate that heat back into the mill. So you've got a lot of heat built up, and you're building more heat as you're continuing to grind, and it just becomes, your friction box becomes a heater box at that point. So managing the amount of time that you grind can also be tremendously beneficial to you. All mills have a different personality about them, and you have to work with them and figure out what their personality actually is, because how this mill grinds is going to be different than how my Williams grinds, and these two, the Metas and the Williams, definitely grind very different than the Osteoroller back here. And so you have to have different techniques for working with your equipment. So it's not a simple matter of you turn it on, set it, and you're good to go. At least I can't tell you that. But what I can say, once you gain experience working with your mill, you will get to the point where, okay, I've got yellow corn, and I know that if I have yellow corn and I set this at 3/8 of an inch, and then I set this at noon, what I'm going to get is a ground product that, when sifted, is 50% grits and 50% cornmeal. And you can only do that through gaining experience and working with your mill. But you will get to that point. It's just going to take you some time to learn its particulars. I do want to take a moment and talk about safety a little bit. I've kind of mentioned it with wheat and the potential for fire. Yeah, just be careful with these things. As you can see, this has an open belt on it. There's no guard. I don't know if it didn't have one or somebody that I bought it from took it off. I don't know, but I've never put a guard on it. So, and this is especially true with older machines like the Williams over there. There's a lot of open parts, right? Stuff is moving out where you can get to it. You can put your fingers right in here, right? When it's moving, you can put your fingers right in there. So just be mindful of how your machine is configured. Open belt, moving parts, and keeping track of your digits. Keep track of your digits. Stone mills in general are not set it and forget it kind of machines. You don't want to just set this and walk off. Bad idea. These things sometimes have a mind of their own. This one in particular, you really got to watch this lock nut on it. It's not uncommon to have it back off, and if you're not paying attention, you've just run a bunch of corn through it, and you've got a whole lot of nothing in the bottom because it didn't grind it, because the stones are too far apart. And then you just have to regrind everything. So definitely pay attention to your stone mills, and don't just walk away from anything. That's a good tip for a lot of things actually. Don't set it and forget it, unless it's really just kind of designed for that sort of work. This is definitely not designed for that. you do want to pay attention to it. There's depending on where you get your grain, okay, you need to pay attention to it. Some grain is cleaner than others. So you might find little bitty rocks in your grain. You can find other bits and bobs that could be in your grain. Some mills, this one does not have it, but there are some mills like the Ossi-Roller, and I've got another Metas out here, which have magnets in your shoe. And that's really good. So if you happen to have something metal like a screw that you didn't see or somehow made it through the grain cleaner, the magnet will pick that up and it'll hold it and keep it from going into your mill. That's a real possibility, actually, is to have a bit of metal come into your mill. So if you have magnets, that's a great safety feature to have in your mills. Like I said, this one doesn't have it. It wasn't made that way. Kind of what I've told you so far about how to operate this thing, operating here and this. These are really just general tips, information that you can apply to bigger mills. You can apply it to smaller things like those little tabletop ones that you have to hand crank. So, yeah, hopefully this video has kind of given you some information about how these things are constructed and how to generally operate them. There is no replacement for good sense when you're working with these things. So do pay attention to what you're doing when you're working with them. Do be careful and be mindful of moving parts and what's going on. And it can be really, 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 really easy to get distracted, because when you're in here and you're working, you're doing the whole bit, because there's more to it than just putting grain through a mill. There's this whole sifting process, which I haven't even touched, that goes with this. You've got the mill running, you've got your sifter running, you've got, you're trying to do some other things. Maybe you're bagging, who knows what. But you've got a lot of stuff going on and you're moving around, and it's really easy to turn your back on it, or the sifter, or another machine, or something. And then it kind of decides to go walk about on you. So it's not a bad idea to develop a safety plan. And that's a topic for another video, which I won't get into today. But otherwise, this is a great activity to get into. It is pretty expensive to get into. Even a mill of this size, which is not big, it's 8 inches. It's a few $1,000s for something like this. You might be able to pick it up secondhand. I got lucky just even finding it. These things are very desirable, so they're hard to pick up, mainly because you just don't see them too much. But they do exist, and they are out there. But I do hope that you have enjoyed this video. I hope you've found it informative. And so please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be putting out some more videos about all kinds of subjects that I'm coming up with, such as the sifter and the Ossi-Roller. I'm going to take it apart one day. So keep checking back, and thank you very much for watching.